And we are on. So this is Hack and Grow Rich, episode 103. We don't have 103 episodes yet, but we're calling them that. I have with me today is my co-host, Bart Baggett, who in general is just an awesome dude. But I like Bart in particular because he is one of the few people I know who's really actually self-reflective. And that's one of the things that impressed me about Bart the most. He coaches people at very high levels, people that are already millionaires and, a couple billionaires, and he coaches them with his success tactics and kind of his different systems. But I've always been very impressed about how self-reflective Bart is. So welcome, Bart. Good to see you.
Shaahin, that's a nice compliment. Thank you so much. I feel the same way about you. When you talk to successful people, sometimes there's a lot of bravado and ego, and that's annoying to me. And I've never found you that way at all, despite your tremendous success. I think when I finally got good at comedy is when I began to be a little more vulnerable and more self-reflective on stage. Including, I've been doing seminars since I was 19, but I didn't do comedy for a while. So that's a very good compliment. And today's topic, I love what you came up with today, hacking self-confidence. And I love that so much because that is one of the reasons I do what I do is somebody gave me a hack when I was 14. I'll get to it later. And it literally changed my self-esteem and changed my confidence. And so if you stick around in this show, we're going to go through both of our favorite hacks that can help you and your kids and your family to have more self-confidence.
Will help you hack and grow rich, I guess. So, or as every mentor I ever had is don't say things like I guess, or I think, or I wish, just say that you're going to do it. So we're going to do that today.
Yeah, I actually, I remember I was at a Tony Robbins event years ago and the staff had a weird vocabulary. And I thought it was kind of silly at the time because I was only 18 or 17 or whatever. And now I don't find it silly. And I don't let my staff use the word try. And I don't let my friends say, I'll try and stop by your party. I will literally stop them and say, no, just say you're not going to be there or you're going to be there, because the internal language makes a big difference. And so people think I'm a language Nazi now, but Shane, what I realize is my own internal dialogue dictates my state. It dictates my success. It dictates my frame. And so if I can't control my internal dialogue, at least I can, help my staff and my friends not lie to themselves and say they try and come to my party.
Yeah. No, it's true, right? It's what we learned from NLP. The map is not the territory, common saying in NLP, right? But you've got to create the map to the territory. And you can do that in part by your language. So I couldn't agree more with you there. You just don't want to get too freaking airy-fairy with it and be like one of these new agers who all they're doing is using language, but no action.
It's funny because people might think we're a little new agey because the thrill pill cult and your background with all the herbal ecstasy, and I do handwriting analysis and other stuff, which is it's definitely not mainstream, but I just don't think it's in the new age category. I think it's more cognitive psychology, positive psychology. I think it's much more tangible. I see myself much more as a scientist or psychologist than any kind of new age hippie, for sure. But I don't know if some guy in a 3-piece suit would think that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you have dogma on both sides of the fence. So on one end, I went from being completely believing all that stuff, all that woo-woo stuff, to becoming, very strict scientifically based. And then I thought about it, and it's interesting. The thing that made me lose my faith, or if you call it faith, in 100%, pure scientific thought is doctors. I suffered from eczema for most of my life. And I went to a doctor and, a couple of them, and they all, they've got like 3 tools in their bag that they can give you, right? Take this medicine, take these steroids, take this shampoo, do this or that. And, my skin was getting really bad. And, the guy just sat me down. He's like, look, I'm like, well, so if I take all this stuff, will it heal it? And he sits me down and he goes, no, buddy, it's a degenerative disease. And, it's just going to get worse in time. I said, well, why the hell am I taking this stuff that has all kinds of side effects? He's like, well, we can manage the disease. I said, dude, I don't want you to manage the disease. I want the disease to go. And there was zero, I realized there was like zero space for any possibility outside of that. Cause I had a list, I just one of the things that, I teach my students in my Amazon course and Amazon mastery, and through a lot of the business people that I coach and the businesses that I grow, is that when it comes to professionals, and I learned this from one of my mentor, is that we manage them. They don't manage us. So when you go to a lawyer, you go to a doctor, you go to an accountant, you have to be in the pilot seat. They are not the pilot. They are your flight attendant at best. And you are directing them exactly what you want. So when I go to a doctor, I bring a list of things, a list of therapies. If they've never heard of the therapies, I already have it written down or previously emailed to them, scientific papers backed on those, and I want them to comment on that. And if they don't, that is not the right doctor for me. So when I went to this guy, I realized that there was no room for anything other than what he, had been taught through this very rigid scientific process. And he was a fine guy, but there was no room. And so I did research, and believe it or not, with a very simple solution of herbs and salt water, I've 98% cured myself, 100% from, fairly debilitating eczema. As far as just, it's terrible for your confidence and that kind of thing, and which is what we're talking about. And, that experience of finding something natural that works, and works really freaking well, better than any of the drugs that they gave, by the way. A very simple solution of salt water and herbs, which worked for me. It might not work for 100% of people, but finding something like that, it was like a WTF moment. I was like, dude, like, WTF? What the heck? Why didn't you explain these options to me? Why didn't we go through that? So then I thought to myself, well, what else is there? And this is what I think about that, Bart, is that what I realized is that there may be things operating outside of our scientific principles. And even the greatest skeptic would say it's possible, right? And I love reading the work of people like Richard Dawkins, and listening to Michael Shermer, who's like the king of all skeptics, and seeing how these guys think. I love watching them be critical of that kind of woo. But if we are open to it to some extent, saying, I don't know, I'm not going to name it, but I don't know, you may open up the possibility of something working just for you. And that's the problem with this rigid scientific dogma, is that there's a very rigid series of rules and beliefs that have to come into place. And it doesn't leave a lot of air for new findings, new discoveries that may work for an army of one, just you or just me. Right. So if we find out that scientifically there's no evidence that eating, curry 3 times a week cures your eczema, but you eat curry 3 times a week and it cures your eczema and it doesn't do it for anybody else, maybe it's not scientifically valid, but it's sure as heck effective for you, right? So at the end of the day,
found
yeah,
that the Chinese medicine and Western medicine just fundamentally disagree on principles. And yet I've had both great success using different treatments depending on what I was struggling through. But there's no agreement. The chi and the energy, and it's literally like 2 different planets trying to coexist with these different philosophies. And I know they both work at certain times. But if I get my leg cut off, I want Western medicine. And if I want, my skin fixed, I'll probably go to my Eastern medicine doctor. And I think that's what you're saying. I have a concept, Shaahin, that I talk about. There's always an option C. And so no matter what the problem is, I have a belief that there's an option C that I'm not seeing, A, B, C, but I'm too blind to see it. And so I keep telling my staff, like, hey, there's got to be another option. We're just not seeing it. And I think that's what you're talking about, is keeping that door open, take everything we know, but have an open-mindedness for something extraordinary that maybe we didn't see.
I love that. Yeah, I teach the same thing to my students. I say, look, one thing that we do know is that the more options that you have, the higher the likelihood of you making a good decision. Now, you might not choose all of those options, right? We might only be option one and option two, and we're probably going to go with option one. But if we've got 10 options in front of us, what we do know from the decision-making matrix is that you have a much higher likelihood, much more probability of making a good decision when you have more options. Look around us in the world, right? People who have more options end up doing better in life. If you have every university in the world to choose from, you might still choose the one closest to your house, but that possibility, that availability gives you much more leeway in the world. So I much like you, I love that option C. And I would add to that option D through F, D through Z, that we should have as many options as possible, right? Because that's ultimately what life is about.
Well, that's just ultimate freedom. If you don't have options, and we talked about this on a previous podcast, the disease of poverty. You only have one doctor, or you have no doctor, or you can't even go to a doctor. Like you are literally stuck with no freedom. So you have no options. When you have no options, it just spirals downhill. So how does that relate to self-confidence? I want to talk about the hack, but I wanted to find something first. And we were just having this conversation with my sister, who's also a certified NLP practitioner, very, very intelligent woman. She said, Bart, what's the difference between self-esteem and confidence? So I want to ask your take on that, because I have a particular angle. And do you think that they're both required to make financial breakthroughs and to hack your brain for money?
Yeah, we talked about Richard Koch, Richard Koch and Richard Koch's book, Unreasonable Success. And in his book, he also talks about one of the pillars of highly successful people. He looked at Jeff Bezos of Amazon. He looked at Steve Jobs of Apple, all these different people. And one of the elements that he found was this unshakable, unreasonable self-confidence, this belief in self that, you don't know why, you have no good reason to have that belief, but you just know and you act despite. So I think, Bart, and I'm really eager to hear what your hack is. And my hack is pretty straightforward. My hack is act like the person you want to become. That's it. So to build that confidence, you take on the persona. We used to talk about, we talk about on almost every episode here about Stuart Wilde, and the trick to money is having some, and how he would teach us, hey, just go into a cafe, the most expensive place, the most expensive hotel in town, and just get a coffee and drink that coffee and smell the leather on the seats, or go to the Ferrari dealership and look at the car, see what the buttons look like, hold the key if they'll let you, really feel like you're part of that. And that's really, for me, the hack to self-confidence. But, for me, there's nothing as important as self-confidence when I'm building a business. And when I'm building an Amazon business, when I'm building any new venture that I get involved with. And the reason is that I am not a detail-oriented person. And we talk about this a lot. You could potentially be the best technician in the world at any of a series of specialized tasks. But unless you have that broad picture and can paint in broad strokes, that's not going to matter, because specialized knowledge that we talk about can be hired out. The best graphic artist in the world, I can pay an hourly salary to and get them to, utilize 40 years of graphic design knowledge in an hour or 2 hours worth of pay. What the world, I believe, deems of value, even greater value, is the broad strokes. You want to be a thought leader. And to be a thought leader, Bart, you have to have this unshakable self-confidence. See, I'm not a detail-oriented person, which is one of the reasons why, like in martial arts in particular, I struggle. I've been years and years at different fighting arts and martial arts. And I'm just like, yeah. I'm just going to get in there and, it'll all work, right? A punch is a punch, kick is a kick, right? If I got to grapple, I can do that. But those arts, the guys who excel at those arts are the guys that'll break down a punch into 5,000 different elements. In jiu-jitsu, in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which I've been practicing for a number of years now, the Brazilians, the really, really expert guys, the black belts, those guys will take a simple movement and break it down into 1,000 micro steps that they've perfected and micro perfected. And that's not me. I am a broad strokes guy. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why myself, you, and a lot of other people who I know who've reached these super high levels of success in life are very broad stroke. Look at Jeff Bezos. Look at Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is like, make the friggin' phone work with no buttons. Have a nice day. And he leaves the room and the engineers are standing there going, the technology for this is 2 years away, sir. He's like, great, you got until Tuesday. That's when I'm going to unveil it. Broad strokes, right? But that takes confidence. Being technically proficient at a task just takes hours. You don't have to have confidence to know how to be a great graphic designer or a great coder or programmer or know how to rebuild an engine in a Ferrari. Maybe that needs a little bit of confidence, but not really, right? You just need the technical skills. So for me, Bart, I am very interested in hearing your opinion, like anything, selling on Amazon, selling on eBay, having any kind of online e-commerce business, and learning how to do that at a mastery level requires one person to have those broad strokes and a lot of technicians. But the technicians you can hire.
I didn't hear the answer to self-esteem versus self-worth. Let me restate that question here since we had a little camera malfunction.
Gotcha. Was that my camera or your camera?
It just went off for some reason. I guess it got hot. So that's a great answer, Shaahin. Maybe you said it and I missed it. The self-esteem versus, the self-worth, like self-esteem versus confidence, because everything you just said, like confidence and leadership, and it explains exactly why people make millions of dollars when they're CEOs, because they're bringing the vision. And all the people that have political opinions are so upset about this wage gap. They're replaceable. Like the people at the bottom are completely, interchangeable. And that's why they don't make as much money. But we're not talking political. What I want to know is, like, is their self-confidence and self-worth the same? Are those words interchangeable in your vocabulary, like self-esteem? Because you've got a kid, right? You want that kid to have a great self-esteem. And the first time he swings a bat, he's not going to be very confident, right?
Yeah.
But he might have a great self-esteem. So what's your difference before I tell you my distinctions?
So we often say that competence brings about confidence. If you've practiced that pitch a million times, that competence brings about the confidence when you get out there. I'm going to beat this thing, out the thing. Similar in martial arts. If I'm competent at doing my techniques, when I spar, I know that regardless of how good the person is on the other side, that I'm competent enough to deliver enough tactics to be able to hold my own in the ring with this other person. So at the end of the day, I think self-worth, is important. Competence is more important as far as self-confidence goes. You have to be, dude, how many incompetent people do we encounter every day just walking around? Like, how many of these guys that are just like, dude, you do one thing. It's just one thing. You do one thing. Just do it right. And this is funny because this is one of the most incredible things. We go to Mexico a lot. I made a film in Mexico a while back, and we go there a lot. And, it's glorious. If you ever want to go to an amazing place very close to the States, is Mexico City. And we go to Mexico City to the best of the best restaurants. I mean, the really world-class restaurants. And even the smaller restaurants that we go to, just little taquerias where they serve the little homemade food and that kind of stuff. And every waiter, every single person in there, they're not an actor. They are not doing something else. They are not a slash this slasher, right? They are a waiter, and they will bring you the food with great pride. And if there's anything wrong with your food, they will take it personally, not because they want to get a tip. Sure, there's a little bit of a tipping culture since, Westerners have been, frequenting a lot of these places, but that's not what they're about. They do it because they love what they do. And and they are competent at what they do. You cannot get a job waiting at one of these restaurants, even though they're paying them very low salary compared to what we get, unless you're competent at what you do. When I go to South and Central America, all I see is competent people everywhere I go. If you're a doctor, you're competent, nurse competent. But here in the States, dude, I cannot tell you how many times I've gone to a restaurant and ask the question of the waiter or the waitress to have them just throw their hands up. I don't know. You think it's got gluten in it? You do one thing. You're a waitress. You work at this restaurant. Right now, you're doing one thing. Like, if I was the waiter at that restaurant, I would know, you got 20 menu items. I would know every single thing in there. And when you ask me, I would tell you. If I didn't know, I'd say, sir, that's a great question. Let me go ask the chef and come back. Competence brings about confidence, my opinion. So again, I think I did a great job tonight of not answering your question.
So let me tell you what I perceive it, and perhaps it's because I've done the psychology of handwriting so long, there happens to be these distinctions within that science, and so I kind of thought about it this way. And one of the things that I found a lot of people get confused with is vanity and pride, and they confuse that with ego. And then I say with the word ego, and people go, oh, I don't want to be egotistical. That's a bad word. Yet ego is also the same thing as confidence, personal space. I'm going to come in the room. You're going to know I'm here. I'm going to get on stage. And that's a wonderful thing, unless it becomes arrogance. And then people find that kind of annoying sometimes. And so for me, there's really 3-4 areas that are distinguishably different. And of course, unless you really understand some cognitive psychology, it's hard to spot those, in yourself and your friends and stuff. So you got ego, which is the sense of how important I am and how much space I hold. And I think that relates really strongly to athletics and to sports and then to confidence. Because if someone's ability to perform well on the football field, basketball, that is all ego. In fact, there was a research study about the NBA, and they found that despite hundreds of scouting reports, there's only one difference in the college kids that make it in the NBA. Do you know what that was, Shaahin? Of all the personality traits and all the skills, I mean, everything.
Was it
confident? Was literally, but it was narcissism.
Oh, no way.
It was excessive confidence. It was to the point that they wanted to be the only star. It was a star quality. And you think about it as a team player, but every one of those kids was not the team player. They were the most outstanding kid on their team their entire life. And that's why they're in the NBA. So I thought that's fascinating. So obviously narcissism has some value. I mean, look at all these people that do great things. There's this wonderful documentary right now called The Lady in the Dale. If you've seen it, it's about this little yellow car. And I think her name is Liz Carmichael, is the lead character. And I just was fascinated by how she convinced everybody this car is going to be a big deal. And her employees, even after she went to jail, were like, I'd work for her in a second. She's amazing. And it definitely wasn't her physical appearance. It was this undeniable belief in herself and the ability to sell a dream. And if you're watching it, you're like, well, maybe she's a con artist, maybe she's not. So to me, that's the confidence, right? But what I found is this important distinction is that self-esteem is, am I worth it? Am I worthy of love? Am I worth money? Am I good enough? And I came across somebody, yes, I analyzed her handwriting, and she literally used to burn herself with cigarettes. And she would say things like, I hate myself. And I would just be like, of course, I've never said those words about myself ever. And I sure would never think of cutting myself, right? But she hated herself so much self-loathing that she had bulimia and anorexia, if you go back to her history. So that's a low self-esteem, right? That same girl might have a lot of confidence in her job. Like she talked about her job and she sells retail. She's like, I'm the best retail salesman. So it's interesting. I know for a fact she had low self-esteem. She burns herself. She says things like, I hate myself. I'm not worthy. But I'd hire her in a sales. You know why? Because she's really good. So that's two different things. If you can get all those aligned in your brain, be confident, have enough ego to, to hold your boundaries and to be great, not necessarily narcissistic. And if you can feel worthy, feel worthy of making money and love, and you can have enough reps and competence to have the confidence, I mean, you're unstoppable. Like you're literally unstoppable if you can get all those things running at the same time. And so what I did, even when I was writing my first book at 23, I'm like, how do I make this easy? Because unless you grow up in a happy household, you might have self-esteem issues. There's so many ways people can get their confidence eroded. And so one of the things I hacked was like, well, let's see if we can use NLP or hypnosis or handwriting, or how can we kind of short circuit this auto response so that our brain goes, yes, I can do it. Barry, I've never done it before. That's okay. I can do it. Like I can figure it out, and so I feel like I can do anything, but Shaahin, I still have self-doubt about something I'm not good at yet. So because I haven't had the reps, I'm not real confident about that thing, but am I worth it? And I know I can do it. So I love what you said, repetitions and competence breeds confidence. That's totally true.
Yeah, the repetition. So was that your hack? Is that the hack?
No, I'm telling you, I 2 hacks.
We're gonna hold that.
I'll give you my 2 hacks, and then you can give me your 2 hacks.
Okay.
My first hack is actually very similar to what you mentioned. I just named it, and I call it the James Bond technique. And so it's basically, now this is for the male audience, but a female audience might pick another avatar. So remember, there's this phrase that some people, what would Jesus do? You ever heard that?
Yeah,
it's almost like
all
comical.
the time.
Yeah, but I say, what would James Bond do? Because that guy, to me, is the most self-confident avatar I can think of. Like he always gets the girl. He always, avoids the bullets. He always gets the bad guy. Like he's just a total badass. So if I'm in a situation and I'm like, well, there's a pretty girl, but maybe she wouldn't, maybe I won't talk to her. Maybe she already has a boyfriend, right? And this is back when I was, dating a lot. And I would say, what would James Bond do? James Bond would just walk up and say, hi, I'm James Bond. Like it would be so simple. And so I would act like somebody else and I would take his frame of the world. And his frame of the world is, I can do anything I want. I'm James Bond. So that's my first hack is, what would James Bond do?
So can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So when you say, what would James Bond do? Which James Bond comes to mind right away?
For me, because I'm a kid of the 80s, it's probably like Pierce Bronson or Roger Moore. But Sean Connery, I think, would probably be the one that comes to mind when I want to be the most seductive dude. I'm Sean Connery.
There is one badass, and it is Sean Connery. The rest of those guys are pretty badass. Like you look at Daniel Craig's very good. A buddy of mine was the first bad guy in Casino Royale. We can have him on the show, Darwin Shaw. He's amazing. And he says Daniel Craig really is, pretty badass guy. But really, like when you look back in that era of like men that had that true masculinity, like real men who just made no excuses, right? Took full responsibility. That's what Sean Connery was. I think he's just an unbelievable actor, but moreover, he really personified that role and that era.
I'm pretty sure that I published this on my website. I'm sure you can Google it. Sean Connery Handwriting Analysis. Because he died recently, and I published this article. Like, I respect for him, and he had written a letter to Bill Gates and basically, or Steve Jobs or one of them, and said, look, I'm fucking James Bond. Stop asking me to sell computers. Like he was just telling him to fuck off. But his signature is everything I teach. It's confident. It's optimism. It's got ego. It's got high self-esteem. It's got all the pieces of the puzzle if you were kind of way down the rabbit hole in what we teach. But he has such swagger, and he brought it to the screen so well. So yeah, I think the answer is, I think of Sean Connery if I want to go, shake somebody's hand that I'm nervous about shaking or something.
Yeah. I think he's a guy who like I aspire to be. I mean, I don't know what he was like personally, but
right.
As far as like the image that he portrayed. So I'll tell you, funny story, and I want to hear your second hack. So my grandfather, was one of the few guys outside of myself that made a success in our family in Iran. And I remember one of the markers for this was, he must have been in his 40s. He took care of 9 brothers and sisters, none of which were successful. So he took care of everybody in the family. And basically just coming out of doing his military service in Iran in the Shah era, he came out and he just, started going to the markets and figuring out how to trade steel and trade, commodities. And I remember when I was a kid growing up at their house in Iran, that dude would be taking a nap every day at noon. Dude would be napping. And I would be like, man, that's what I want to do. Like all these other people are going to jobs, hustling, all this stuff. And grandpa, he just sleeps at noon when he wants to. And then he wakes up, he yells a little bit, people bring him tea and whatever. And so we moved to America, and my grandfather, moved to America, and, he moved his whole life here. And I remember I was staying with him for a period of time in my very early teenage years. And my grandfather was obsessed with American television. He just couldn't believe how good it was, because from where he was living, things were very limited. You had 1 or 2 channels, and, we all moved to Europe. It's not like here. And he would turn over, he'd turn his head and look at me all the time. And he would be like, Shaahin, what are you doing with your life? Why can you not be better? And I say, hey, Grandpa, what do you mean? I'm trying real hard. I'm studying whatever. He's like, you need to have more character. Can you be more like this Bob Barker? He's the man you should look at this. He has beautiful women. He understands money. Oh, this Bob Barker. And that was his ideal for masculinity in those ages. He just saw this man who was like, always, very sensibly dressed, but very, fairly conservative, good disposition, and always had beautiful women around him and was around money and things. So my grandfather thought that he was the pinnacle of masculinity. Bob Barker.
He's a game show host, right?
The game show host. The Price is Right. Yeah. For you guys who don't know, Bob Barker was the original host of the show, The Price is Right, where I guess contestants would go on and they would spin a wheel and guess how much something is. And you remember his big thing was, and look what's behind door number 3, a new car. Remember that?
I didn't know that was him. I mean, it's so common these days to do that. I forgot where it all came from originally. That's so funny. So be more like Bob Barker. Bob Barker. Yeah. According to my grandfather,
that was it. That was confidence, masculinity, all those things that he loved. He gotten into, with Bob Barker. But
I think the same theory would apply with a woman, because a woman can be confident. So think of like Sophia Loren or whatever, feminine, if you want to mix femininity into it, and then think, what would she do? Like Marilyn Monroe. There was a number of those movie stars that just owned a room. Whether it was sex symbol or not, they owned the room. And that's what we're talking about with this energy and the self-confidence. Second hack, this is really interesting. And this is probably what kind of put me on the map years ago. When I was 14 years old, I met a doctor, a hypnotist, and he said, Bart, he goes, I'm going to give you a couple of ways, for you to be happier. He goes, I'm going to make a hypnosis audio for you, literally on a cassette, Shaahin. And it just told me that I was good enough. Kind of typical affirmation stuff. I'm like, sure, I'll do it. What do I got to lose? A low self-esteem? Great. I'll lose that. What's the possible worst could happen? And he goes, second thing I want you to do is I want you to make a couple of changes to your handwriting. And I said, well, why would I do that? Like, what does that have to do with it? He goes, I don't care how your handwriting looks. I just want the repetitions over and over and over of this thing I'm going to teach you. So the neuro pathway of this particular thing somehow affected my brain. And within about a year, Shaahin, I was literally like so much more confident, because what I did was I took my T bar, which is on the letter T, is a B-A-R-T, from the middle of the stem to the top of the stem. And I know it sounds like silly, but I said, I'll be my first guinea pig. I've given that advice, to probably 3 million people, if you include all the radio shows I've been on, and thousands have written back and said it actually works. Like this little hack of changing and repetition, you can't do it once, but if you can do this every day and write, that'll boost your self-esteem. And I don't know why it works, Shaahin. I don't know how this little thing in the letter T goes into your brain. I wish I could scan it and figure it out. And then I thought, okay, well, what else can I change? And what I found was when people start underlining their names, that gives them a little bit more of that leadership quality that you're talking about. So I started picking out individual traits, and I thought, what if I could actually just sort of meld together like this perfect person for me or for your perfect job? And so you could change a number of traits. So I began to reduce fears and increase the positive traits. So my second hack is underline your name and raise your T-bar.
Underline, anytime you write your name, put an underline to it.
When you're signing your name, your signature.
When you're signing your name. Okay. Only when you're
Yeah.
signing your name, underline it. So anywhere where you're writing your name, you're signing your name, underline it, and then the line on the T, move that up.
Move that up, and that'll increase your ability to dream, to overcome your fear of failure, and you'll start thinking bigger, which maybe you call it broad strokes. It just, and I can tell you the moment I knew it worked and I remember I'm 14 or 15 years old, right? I remember walking up to this cheerleader and asking her out, someone that had never really talked to, right? And she said no, by the way.
Yeah.
and I walked off and I went, huh, well, never hurts to try. And it just went right off my shoulders. Very funny. That girl I ran into at my class reunion, and she is still very pretty. And she goes, Bart, I don't remember that story at all. And I'm so sorry I didn't go out with you. You know, like I was like, oh my God, people just put so much pressure on themselves. She has no recollection, no memory of it. But I knew at that moment something switched because I wouldn't have done it 6 months ago. I was fear rejection. She's too pretty, or she's, cheerleader. And now I'm like, hey man, what do I got to lose, dude? Just walk up to the pretty girl. And that was my, as an adult, of course, there's other stories, but as a kid, I was like, hey, this is obviously working. This is cool.
Yeah. A friend of mine, what does he say? He's got a really good saying that's, if you don't talk to any new people, you'll end up marrying your cousin. And I love that. I love that quote because, I think, look, if you're a single guy, I'm a family guy, married with a kid, happily married with a kid. And, like my life is good, but, there was a time where I was dating. But outside of that, I think, and outside of COVID, assuming COVID's going to end, it's one of the great things in life. And you're fantastic at it because you're fantastic at talking to people because you have a natural curiosity, which I think is one of the keys to your success. You are truly, genuinely, no bullshit, fascinated by humans. And you have this like curiosity. And I wonder, have you had that since you were a kid?
No, I think I started when I began to study handwriting analysis. I think what happened is my dad and I went to this class, and it was give us something to do together. So he would analyze waitresses' handwriting. But what I noticed was everywhere he went, he was the most popular person in the restaurant, right? Everybody would come over and say hello. And my God, this is the he does handwriting. And so what I realized was when you did that thing, which was kind of like a little mind reading thing, right? Oh my God, how's your relationship with your father? They would just open up and spill their guts to you. And
Sure.
I began to see that people are fascinating and people are in pain and people
Mm.
are sometimes not what they seem to be. Like I remember at summer camp, I remember the next year after I started learning this, I had so much empathy for the bully the previous year because I didn't realize he was insecure. I thought he was mean. Does it make sense? Like those little distinctions for a kid gave me empathy, which then made me even more interested to see how I could help them or how they got to where they are or how they get so damaged. And I wouldn't consider myself a really empathetic person, definitely not in my comedy. I'm a little judgy actually, but I have learned that I think the natural curiosity of how did this person get there? Why did this person show up this way? And even the fact that I wrote a book called The Success Secrets of the Rich and Happy, like I wanted to hack wealth. I wanted to make sure that there's a path if you didn't and you weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth, which you weren't, by the way. They know that you've been successful so long, you may have forgot what it's like to be poor, but it's not good.
I was born with a plastic spoon in my mouth. But interestingly enough, so do you know where that term comes from? Silver spoon in the mouth, when they say someone's born with a silver spoon?
I mean, except for the idea that silver is, used by rich people, like a ladle or a soup spoon, but I don't know the source of it.
So very close. So time of the plague, silver, you've heard of colloidal silver and all these types of things, which by the way is on the periphery of woo-woo. But silver on its own has antibacterial, antimicrobial properties. That's scientifically proven. bacteria has a very difficult time sticking to silver. So during the time of disease and the time of the plagues and all these types of things, the wealthy people, when a child was born, would always put a little tiny spoon, silver, in his mouth to prevent disease and bacteria from getting in. So when they say born with a silver spoon in his mouth, is a is in relation to that. The fact
Love
that
that story. I never knew that. I'm so glad I listened to this podcast. Wait a second, I'm co-hosting it. Oh gosh, it's so much fun. I love it. Yeah, I mean, we were very middle class. My dad was just laughing about how poor he was. He was talking about how his house was so poor that once they built it, the wood shrank, and then it had space between the wood. So he would put up cardboard so that in the winter the wind wouldn't come through his bedroom. Like he was like literally like a 1 bedroom out in the middle of East Texas. So yeah, he overcame quite a lot, and I feel like I had a silver spoon in my mouth compared to him. You know what I mean? Like we're middle class, and he was literally poor, like at least sleeping on a dirt board poor. So I mean, in one generation or two, all of a sudden we've made it to a whole different location in life. What would happen to you if you guys hadn't moved? Would you be dead? If your family didn't pick up and come to America, like where would your life ended up now?
No, I don't think we would have been dead. You know, my family were Iranian Jews. We left Iran in the late 70s, around 1979, during the fall of the Shah, and came here mainly because my parents were, you know, the generation before them had been through World War II, and they were afraid that the Holocaust would repeat itself. So those wounds were still open for them, and they were afraid that what they saw coming, and a lot of people argue that that wasn't the issue of the regime, but you know that there started to be some talk, anti-Semitic talk, and a lot of Jewish folk in Iran, like my grandfather included, were doing things like lending money. And in that particular society and culture, lending money is illegal. It's against the Islamic laws. So my grandfather started to fear for his life. And when the regime changed, all the people that owed him money were like, what money, dude? And I remember that time. So, you know, a lot of people stayed and they're just fine. You know, the country definitely is undergoing and has been going through a lot of difficult economic times. And the people are not the government, right? The Iranian people are, you know, some of the sweetest people you'll ever meet. And anybody who's been to Iran knows this. The government is a very different thing, especially a theocratic government is a completely different thing than the people who they govern, like any country. But I think, you know, if we were to have stayed there, I think worse than being poor, we would have been solidly middle class, and I would have led a very predictable life, which I just don't feel was in the cards for me. But you know, it's those things, right? It's like, you know, remember, like we talked about this, like what's the one thing that could have happened that shifted your whole life? We talked about transformational experiences. You know, any one event could change the entire trajectory of our life. So who knows?
I'm so surprised at sometimes what that is. I was driving through Tennessee a few months ago, and somebody came across my Facebook, and I'm like, "Oh, you live near here?" Yeah, I recognize him from like 20 years ago. You know, he was one of our students, and he used to, and he sent me an email. I said, "By the way, I read your book 20 years ago, and it took me 15 years, but I'm finally rich and happy, and I want to thank you about that." He goes, "What I didn't expect is it to take so many years, but." Apparently, my book, whether it was a great book or not, turned his brain, and he went, you know what? I can get there. And so he started reading Think and Grow Rich. He started reading Tony Robbins, started reading other books. He started thinking outside the box. And so he gives me credit for that one decision that shifted his lens. And literally he's retired at 55 right now. But I didn't do the work. But that one decision to pick up that book was, and it really made me feel good, Shaahin, because, you know, for me, you do all that work and occasionally you get a letter or an email, but it's not like you get thousands of emails or letters every day, because, you know, you do this and you've written a book. In fact, you've got one coming out really soon. It's a lot of work. and it's really thankless. And unless it becomes a bestseller, you know, it's just great. By the way, I love your first episode of Billion. You
Yeah.
hired these amazing actors. I mean, it's an interesting podcast. I think it's going to be great when the whole thing rolls out. Is your book out yet? Can we pick up a copy yet?
So we will get to Billion. Do you have an audio version of your book?
That is on my to-do list. My book called The Magic Question, which is a very short book, is on Audible, and it's literally one of my best sellers. And so I keep seeing the royalties and thinking, why don't I have my other book on Audible? Like, I'm getting royalties every day. So it is literally on the list of things to do this month, but it'll probably be a few months before The Rich and Happy book is on Audible.
So could we possibly give our listeners some kind of advance notice, maybe, and also if they get the Audible book, that you might throw in some other thing for them, some special thing for Hack and Grow Rich listeners?
I would love that. In fact, I will tell you this, because I'm halfway finished with the audio version of it. If they get the PDF version from my website, they actually get like half the audiobook, because I already finished half of it. So it's already like up and running there. But if you get it through like Amazon, I can't do it. So stop by bartbaggett.com or Handwriting University. And The Rich and Happy is a great book. I mean, it's a 400-page book. I mean, it's not an easy read, but it's, in fact, we had an email, and I want to ask you this question as we wrap up the program, is what books have made the biggest difference in your life as like a recommendation. Obviously, I'd recommend my own book, but the truth is that book was not Bart's opinion. That was Bart's research of everybody other else's book. So, you know, the Kawasaki stuff on, you know, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that philosophy's there. You got the systems analysis, you know, from like Michael Gerber. You have the leadership. You've got, of course, the cognitive psychology. So I blended that all into what I call kind of a tome or a big book, saying this is the best Bart can come up with about being wealthy. But it's really a result of other interviews, because even when I wrote that book, I wasn't necessarily rich and happy, but I felt like I had a really good grasp on the research of other people that have gone before me. What would your top book tour be if someone was really wanting to break through?
We talked about this last time, and so I'll throw a little, I was going to say a monkey into the wrench, but maybe I'll throw a wrench into the
throw a better metaphor into the podcast.
I'll throw a better metaphor into the podcast. I think that's what we'll do today. I'm going to say that the most impactful books that you read aren't necessarily about the book, but about the time. And the fact that you're here right now, guys, everyone, you should know this. Us as writers, and I've published several books, Bart has published several books. Here's a big secret. We don't make money from books. Books are not a pathway to riches, as you would think. I've got friends that are New York Times bestsellers, have big book deals and all that stuff. The amount of money they make from that is minuscule compared to what they make in other areas of their life. So if you are able and you're at the right place at the right time and you hear somebody and that person inspires you in some way, shape, or form, spending that $10, that $20, that $30 on that book that this person has spent years and countless effort producing is a good move. Now, the book might not be the most spectacular thing you've ever read, but it might be the right thing for you right now. So keep that in mind, guys, as you and gals, as we kind of go through this. So for me, the books that I read were right for me at that time. So it's another element. You know, I play chess oftentimes, right? So I love martial arts and I love chess. I see them as all parts of the same thing. And chess is really like this 4-dimensional way of thinking. And when you play speed chess, which is a completely different game, any chess master will tell you that standard chess and speed chess, where you only have 2 minutes for a whole game or 5 minutes for a whole game, adds a whole nother dimension to the game, which that added dimension is time. Now, the move that you make, and this goes back to strategy, is not as important as if you make an okay move quickly. If you just make okay moves throughout the 2 minutes and the other guy makes amazing moves but takes too much time, you can still win. You can still outplay him. It's all part of the strategy when you add that dimension to the game. So when it comes to absorbing content, absorbing information that empowers you, you have to take into consideration the time and place in your life right now in this moment. Because the books that you read then are going to be that you read now are going to be very different. They're going to have a different impact on you later on in life. And this was always the case for me. I mean, for me, it was the standards, Think and Grow Rich, which, by the way, now is not one of my favorite books at all. But back then it was very impactful, mainly because of the repetition that you talk about. And The Greatest Salesman, Og Mandino, Stuart Wilde, The Trick to Money is Having Some. Love that. I still love reading that, but it doesn't have the same impact for me. And most recently, Richard Koch's book, Unreasonable Success and How to Achieve It. I almost feel like he wrote that with me in his head. I love every aspect of that book, which is a great new book. And so, guys, as we wrap up, I want you to make sure to go to bartbaggett.com and check out all the cool stuff he has on there. My book is not released yet, but I do have the first galley copies. Here's a preview. All right, I'm excited. I'm super excited about
I just have to tell it, that photograph is so cool. And you were 19 when you took that picture, right? Like, you look like you owned the world. And I know that you made a lot of money, but how did you get that kind of crazy self-confidence to sit on that throne like you just been expelled from heaven?
This so was cool. One of the most famous photographers in the world at that time, this guy, David LaChapelle. If you ever want to check out his work, he's got a book called Hotel LaChapelle, and amazing work. And he did this very 90s stereotypical kind of like color photos. And before me, he had shot Leo DiCaprio and all these different celebrities. Madonna had come to his studio. So all these people were there. And then we went to this castle. And I write about it in my book, the whole story of that's kind of a cool story. But the book's coming out. If you guys want to listen to the podcast, just go to ShaahinCheyene.com. We'll include it in the notes, or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, anywhere podcasts are found. You can look up Billions. The first episode from the book is on there. It's Billion without the S, excuse me. Billion, How I Became King of the Thrill Pill Cult. Always share this podcast. If you're watching the video on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and like to our channel. And you can get a hold of me or learn more about selling on Amazon, Amazon Mastery, Amazon FBA at FBAsellercourse.com, or just go to ShaahinCheyene.com and click on the link for Amazon course. I answer every single email personally, so I will get back to you. It might take me some time, but if you want to reach out to me, please do so. And if I can help empower you make your first billion, I'd be delighted to do that. And Bart, thank you so much for being on the show. I'll let you wrap it up.
It's been great. I hope that if you guys have any questions, we're going to start doing a mail segment. So send us an email to either Shaahin or I, or hit it up on Instagram. And we would like to get you on the show, answer questions, help us direct this so that you're getting the most value about a hack your own brain, hack your business, and really become richer and happier. Shaahin, it's been a great show. Thank you so much. I look forward to next week.
Yeah, it's been a blast. We'll see you soon. Goodbye.